And hello everyone, welcome back to another C++ tutorial. So in the previous tutorial, we discussed the basics of OOP. If you haven't seen that tutorial, I highly recommend you do because it has some very important topics we're going to use today. For those of you who may have forgotten, an object is just something you can think of and you can maybe touch or whatnot. Like a book, you can pick up a book. Book has a certain number of pages, it has an author, it has a title, whatnot. Then we have constructors, and these run once the program or once this object has been created. It will run for every object we create. So if we create 3 objects, then it will run 3 times for each object. And then we have a destructor which runs at the end, and it closes everything you need. Very cool. Yeah. Now, let's first start with moving our object into its own file, because as you can see, this is a very small object, but once this object becomes like 100 or a few hundred lines of code, having it in the same file as this file and then maybe adding more objects later as well is going to become awful, because you'll have like one file with hundreds of thousands of lines in it, when you could have one file with maybe 1,000 lines in it instead, of just importing an object instead. So let's do that. Let's create a new file, and I'm going to call this book. And we need 2 types of file. First is the header file, and second is the object file itself. The header file is just to define the object, so how the object will look, whilst the file itself that holds the code is to actually implement it. So here we can say HPP or just H. H is more of a C style way of going, while HPP is C++. But a lot of people still go H, so if you still want to go H, it's perfectly fine. But now if we do that, we have our HPP. Then in here we have to define how our class will look. So first we can go if not defined. So if we have not yet defined, and let's say book underscore H. So if we haven't defined book underscore H, then we should define it. So we can just say end if. And you may have remembered a little bit about this in one of my previous tutorials where I talked about #if and how that includes some code in your executable once you finally compile your code, depending on if it already exists. And this makes sure there are no 2 duplicate objects included inside your executable on the end of the day. It will only be defined once. But now we can say define to actually define that book H, and we can say book H. We don't have to give it a second value. We are just defining it. So if this already exists, then don't create this again. But if it doesn't already exist, feel free and create it. Now you can specify class and book, and then what is public and what is private. Now public, there's a lot of things that are public. For example, we have this constructor and destructor. So we can just go here and say book and tilde book. So for constructor and destructor. And in here, we also have a few attributes or properties, the title, the author, and the pages. We can just copy this and paste it here. Now this right here, it just defines how it will look. We don't implement anything. It just defines, okay, it will look like this. So it doesn't say what it will do. It will just say this exists inside of this object. And of course here we can go #include IOStream. So we can use this string here. Cool. Now we need to remember we have multiple constructors. We have a second constructor for in case we want to add some items to this book here. So we can just go here, paste it, and there we go. Now we have our second constructor. Cool. Now that we have defined how everything looks, let's create the file for our book where we actually say what it does. So book.cpp. Now first we need to include the header file because that contains how our object looks. So hashtag include, and then the file you used here. So book.hpp. Book.hpp. Now we know how it looks, how the doc object looks. Now we need to implement everything in it. For example, book : and this : means it's part of this book function. Now here we can go book. Now we could just put a normal function here as well, but this specifies that this function here is part of this book here. So this is the function and this is the class. So this class right here, that's what we are saying here. It's part of this class. And this is the function book here. And that of course just does this. So we can copy that and you can paste it here. Cool. We have just implemented the first part. Now let's implement the second and the third and everything else. I'm just going to copy these because that's a lot of typing. And now here we can just say book : to specify it's part of the book. And there we go. Now because we have done this, we can now go here and just delete this entire class. And here above say hashtag include, and then just yet again include the header file. There we go. And here we know this is a normal file because it doesn't have these squiggly brackets at the side. And it's engulfed in quotation marks. And then you think this is way cleaner because now we have a file that uses our object. We have a file that declares how the object looks and what's inside of the object. And then we have a file that actually works and designs the whole object. Like this makes the object work. Now my cpile code that I write here, it doesn't really allow me to compile more than one thing. So if I go echo, then okay, yeah, let's maybe go $. Okay, no, that doesn't exist. But it just contains this code right here. That's all that my cpile contains. But now we have more files that we should compile. So we can just say book.cpp. And now it will compile both the main CPP and the book CPP. You do not have to compile the header file. You only have to compile the C++ files. Now if we run this, we get our output. No title, Jack, 0, destroyed book because of what we did here. And just like that, we have split our files into multiple files, making everything so much cleaner to work with. So instead of having it all in one massive file, I think this is way better. Next up, let's talk about getters and setters. So sometimes you want to have specific getters and setters. These getters and setters do what they say they do. One gets data, the other one sets data. One is a getter, it gets the data. The other is a setter, it sets the data. The reason you want getters and setters is why you might want to use this constructor, because it can do some extra things for you when you use it. For example, let's say when we set the author, we should also set the pages when we set the author. Or we could automatically determine how the title is going to look if we set the author. For right now, we're just going to keep it very basic, but that'll kind of give you an idea. So let's create a few functions here as getters and setters. First, I want free getters and free setters. Free to set these values and free to get them. So first, std string get title to say you want to get something. And this will return the title, of course, so return title. Or you could say this dot title, or not dot, but arrow title. And this will just specify that this title. But both works, it depends on what you want to do. I'm going to say this arrow, just because why not? We can then create another getter for the author and one for the pages. So get author. which will return the author, and then get pages. And just so we are clear, let's say these pages are just numbered by the amount of pages, like the amount of paper in the book. It's not the front and the back, it's just the paper, meaning we have to calculate the front and the back. So what we can do, now that we have this getter, is we can say pages times 2, because that will get the front and back. Whilst this pages here just get the amount of papers, just as an example. So this getter can get the data for us and structure it in the way we'd want it. Now we can actually use this, or actually this is inside of the header, we shouldn't be implementing it. But we can now copy this and we can paste it here and we'll get to it. So let's just go here and we can paste it and we'll get back to that. Then here we can clean it. And there we go. The header has its getters defined. And now here we can go and we can say book : and then what we want. And this is what it returns. So what it returns, then the class, and then the function. And then this is what it does and how it returns it. Now that we have these getters, we can actually go here. Instead of saying title, we can say book.getTitle. And this is a special function now to actually get the title instead of having to access it. And now here we can say .get pages, or that one should be author. And then the one below it can be get pages, like that. Now if we were to run it, we get no title, Jack 0, because we didn't actually put any pages. So we can go my book dot pages is equal to 35, and if I run it, we get 70, because this is only the pages, like the papers, whilst this is the front and back counted. Now we can also do setters, which will set the data for us. Go like this, and we can say setters. And take note, getters and setters are all optional. They're not required, just so we know, and we're clear on that. Now setters will usually not return anything unless you specifically ask it to. So here we could just say void, because it doesn't return anything, so void. And instead of get, it will be set. And now we can specify that it should set something. Now this will set the data for us. Then here in book.cpp, we can take these get methods and we can convert them into set methods. Or not convert them, but add new methods that are set methods. And let's just also close this. Now instead of get, we can say set. And then instead of the type it has, we can say void. Now these won't return anything, but we could now do extra things before we set the title, like cout setting the title. And then we can also do some other processing. Then of course here we can then say this dot, or not dot, but this title is equal to, and in the title we enter. So we also want to just copy this again, or we can actually go here and copy these. Then here we can just paste for the sets. There we go. So now this dot title is equal to title. And remember, this dot title or this title is basically the title of the class, not this one here, because this is for the closest one, this is for the class one. Just remember that. If you're still struggling, change this one to an underscore, and now you can just do underscore title and you can remove this there. So if you're still struggling, do this. But if you're not struggling with it, you can just do that. And then of course here we can go and bloop. And now I can just copy these and say is equal to that. And now we have setters to specifically set data. So now here, instead of saying author here, we can go and say my book dot set author. And now we can just pass in Jack. So now we have a special function that we are managing when we want to set data. Same with pages and with the book title. So .set title and then .set pages. And here we can specify 23 and speed. And then here we have our getters. Now I can use them together and boom, there we go. Here we say setting the title. Why? Because we're currently setting the title and we told our set title function to say that whenever we want to set the title. And then it set the title and whatnot, like that. And now that we have this getter and setters, we know we are not using these title author pages outside of this book. We know we're not using it because we're only using it, changing it, and getting it inside of this book object. Nowhere out here are we saying .book or .title or .pages or .author, right? We're just saying that in here. That means we can now create a private section that holds these for us. Now we cannot access these outside of this book here. So my book dot, and as you can see we get functions, but we cannot actually access those specifically. If I want to access the title, I can't. It's not going to allow me to access the title. It says right here, declared is inaccessible. We cannot access it anymore. This is a way to keep your data safe from being mutated by something else that shouldn't be mutating it. So it's always recommended if you have some properties in your class, your object, that doesn't get used outside of this book. It only gets used like set and getted from inside of this. Then just put it in private, because it's better to put it in private than having it being modified whilst not private. But you don't need to put it in private. If you want to, you can still keep it in public. It's personally up to you on the end of the day and your scenario. But in this case, we can move it to private because we're not using it anywhere outside of our class. It's only being used inside of our class. As you can see here, only inside of the class, nowhere outside. And now we can use functions to access them and set them. And that's the power of getters and setters. And then finally, we've almost already covered this, so it's not really necessary to cover it, but it's just so you know you can do more than just this. You can also create your own functions, so custom funcs for custom functions. For example, let's go std string, or let's go float. Let's make it double just because why not? Double calculate price to calculate the price. So it will figure out how much this book costs. You can of course like pass things in here. For example, let's go int popularity. Let's just go pop because I don't know how to spell popularity. There we go. We can now take this custom function and we can put it inside of our book class. So let's put it at the top just so we don't have to go to the bottom the whole time. There we go. Now we can say if popularity is more than 5, then do something else. If it's not more than 5, then we can do something else. So here we can say return this and then pages, so the amount of pages, times the popularity, and that will calculate the price. And with how expensive books are, this is almost accurate. Just kidding. And in here, if the popularity is not more than 5, then we can just say times it by 4 or 3. That will work so well. And now we have a method to calculate what the price of a book will be. Now here we can go and say, we don't need to get anything anymore. Cout calculate, or actually book.calculate, my book.calculate, my bad, calculate price, and the popularity is, let's say, 7. Now if we were to run this, the price would be $161. And if we were to set a popularity as 2, then it will not be nearly as much. 69. Nice. Of course, these functions can also be inside of private, but then these functions should only be used inside of this book, because then it won't be allowed to be used outside of the book like this. As you can see, I'm already getting an error. So if you put a function in here, remember it should only be used inside of this book class. And if you put it in public, then it can be used outside like this. And that is that for our basic on object. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. And I will see you all again in the next C++ tutorial.